So, good morning, everyone. So we are with Avow Hospice. My name is Heather Golden. I'm the marketing liaison for Arbor Glen. This is Jeff Alexander. He's our business development director. I'm going to let you start.
Sure. So the Five Wishes is it was created by an organization for those who, for two reasons. One is it's about making sure that you have the stuff that you need to have in place for end of life and for your decision-making processes and so forth. It is considered to be a legal document for you here. There are some people who have questions about that legality of it. The reality of it is this is something that you can fill out and give to your doctor when it becomes part of your medical record. It becomes part of your decision-making processes as well. So a lot of people will do that. The other reason for this is maybe you already have your stuff in place, which a lot of people do. This is a nice little guide to be able to ensure that you've actually covered all the bases that you needed to cover in your own documents. The other reason I like to make sure we get these out is it gives us an opportunity to really put forth some information that you can share with your family so that you can, it's kind of a talking point component with you. If you need to talk with family, you can go through the document as well from that perspective, and it's helpful. So when you're looking at this, these first couple of pages are really more about what it is and changing it and so forth and so on. So in the first paragraph, you'll see that it just says that it lets everyone know exactly what your expectations and desires are on this first page with 5 wishes. It talks about what is the 5 wishes. It talks about the fact that this is really for when you have serious illness, what your preferences are, what your desired outcomes are, and things of that nature. So if you flip a page, because I don't want to sit here and tell you the history and stuff, because this is really the nuts and bolts is the important component of what it is. So when you look at page 4, and you guys can do this as you go, you can review it, and if you've already got your documents, this is, again, like I said, just a piece that really is important to kind of make sure you've done all crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's, so to speak. So first and foremost is how many of you have your documentations kind of already together and ready? Ish.
What do we have on the refrigerator?
It's on there.
You have your DNR probably on your refrigerator, the yellow sheet?
Yeah, I think so.
Sure. Okay. And that has to be on yellow paper. If you don't have yours on yellow paper, make sure you get it on yellow paper. The emergency services people in particular are trained that if it's not yellow, they're not to adhere to it. The yellow paper, even though it's really easy to get yellow paper and make a copy on yellow paper, it is their process, because if somebody made a copy of something that was old and put it on your refrigerator, it might not be legitimate. So they consider the yellow paper. Yes, ma'am?
So why do people not want to be resuscitated? To me, that's a contradiction.
So the do not resuscitate order is when you have a serious illness in particular, say you have COPD or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or CHF, congestive heart failure, cancers. When you have a disease process and you're starting to get further along in that disease process and you get to the end of that chapter of, you're getting closer to the end of the chapter of your book, people want to go ahead and say, look, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want all the pokes and proddeds and things like that. That's how people end up getting involved with hospice, because not only did they decide that, but they also meet the criteria to have the extra help when you get to that point. So a little quick impromptu conversation about that. We provide palliative and hospice care. So our palliative care actually can provide you with some care before you're ready for hospice. And essentially we're managing some symptoms, some pain management with any disease process that exists. And so from that perspective, we work with people years before they are actually going to be ready to leave this earth. And how many of you were here when we did the talk with Dr. Gloff? Any of you here for our talk with Dr. Gloff?
You were there, Tom.
It was a little bit ago. It was a bit
Yeah,
ago,
it was
so, but that part of that conversation is that when you get involved with hospice and palliative care, a lot of people think that hospice is just that last few days of your life, and it's really not. And so this decision-making booklet helps guide some of those conversations. It guides the conversations about the DNR. I have a guy that used to work for me. He is just turned 46, and he already has a DNR. I don't agree with him, but he knows firsthand what happens when you get resuscitated, and that's part of his conversation was, I don't want to be resuscitated to go live in a nursing home. Now that he's worked more in hospice, he's changed his mindset a little bit, but when I first met him, because he was a social worker in a nursing home, that was what he perceived, and he didn't want to be one of those people. It really becomes a decision on yours is, do you want that? And I always, and in talks that I give, I talk about my grandfather, because my grandfather was able to choose to not have a surgery that would have meant he more than likely spent the rest of his life in a nursing home. And so he made that decision because it made sense to him at 92 years old that he had lived on his own, independently in his own home for so long, that while they could fix it, he wouldn't enjoy and have quality for what was left. So he had the ability to make that decision. A DNR is the same thing. When you get to that point that you really don't think that there's value and quality at the other side of getting resuscitated, because the resuscitation isn't a comfortable thing. And you know that when that happens to you, if your body can't hold up to that, it's something that you would be concerned about. So that's why people typically will do one and put it on their refrigerator. Now you can also identify in the course of that, and that's what some of this book's going to cover. If you haven't already covered it in your own documents, you can also say, I don't want life support. I don't want to have fluids. I don't want nutrition. You can identify what you do and don't want as we go through this. But that DNR is one of those key components to what we do in our company. But you don't even have to have a DNR to be on hospice. You can say, I still want to be fully resuscitated and be on hospice if you meet the criteria. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
I really talk a lot, so you guys can like give me a 5-minute sign or something, and you're fine, I'll stop. Heather knows. So this wish one talks about who you want to be responsible for making decisions for you from a healthcare perspective. Sometimes that's going to be the family member. For me and my mom, I have 2 brothers on my mom's side. I am the oldest, but that's not why I have this. I have her healthcare surrogate because of the fact that she knows I know this side of the world and what goes on with it. And so from her perspective, while she trusts my other brothers implicitly, she still wants me to help make those decisions because of what I do for a living. So you also then can put your second choice. So again, if you look at my mom's paperwork has me, and then it has my brother Jake, and then it has my brother Josh. And it's in that order. So that's why you have here, you have a first, second, and a third choice. They do not have to be family. It can be the person that you trust. My neighbor that used to live downstairs from me, is her neighbor next door to her in her condo is the person that she has listed to take care of her affairs as she continues to progress in aging. Questions about that?
Not a question, but I would also just say, make sure that the person that you pick is actually going to carry forth your wishes. I know a lot of people pick, family members because it's family members, but, you want someone you trust, but you also want someone that is going to make sure that your wishes are carried out. I say that because we see a lot of, in what we do, warring factions between the family members, because I think mom would want this, but, and child B says, oh, okay, yes, but this is what it explicitly says in their will or their 5 wishes, so just pick someone who's gonna.
And unfortunately, it happens much more than you may think. That living wills, documents, so forth, are not honored by the family member simply out of love. We want to keep this person alive forever, but that's not what that person desires. That person wants a comfortable ending to their life. Unfortunately, for selfish purposes, I've seen people kept alive and treated for conditions they didn't want to be treated for.
And that can happen, and that's why Heather brought it up, and she's reiterating. You can have the person that you think is going to do the right thing, but once they are responsible, they now get to make those decisions, whether it was your preference or not, and then it becomes, you have the one daughter who knew what your preference was, and you have the daughter who's in charge who says, but that's not what she really would have wanted. And that's where you have your struggle. So putting stuff specifically in writing gives you a little bit better, a little more of a secure component of this is going to happen the way it's supposed to happen. And nobody wants to, and that's what typically happens. You get to a point where in life, and I tell everybody, even from a hospice perspective, I want you to choose hospice at the right time, but I don't want to see you for 10 years. I don't want to see you till you really need to be on hospice. And you should want the same thing from your decision-making processes. Do you want to have artificial breathing? Do you want to have artificial nutrition? All of those things are things that if you share them on the front end, it makes it a little bit easier for you. Now, one of the things that I will circle back on this wish one for a second, they do have to be 18 years of age. You can't let your great-grandson who's 14 make your decisions. But you can actually make sure that, and I've seen several where they know the grandchild is going to be more likely to make a good decision for them than their kids because, again, that love component becomes and my dad actually chose his significant other as opposed to my older brother on their side because he knew that my older brother would try everything to keep him around. And he had stage 4 cancer, and that wasn't the right decision-making process. He also can be a little bit of a recluse and do whatever he wants. And my dad had specific places he wanted to be buried or have his ashes scattered. And my brother was adamant that he wanted him to go to Arlington National Cemetery. And it was really because my brother wanted him there, not because that's what my dad wanted. So all of those things, all those pieces that are important to you, you need to share with people either by paper or by voice with more than one person around, because that's not what he told me at the end of life. We get that all the time. And so that's what the real point of this is what are your real decision-making processes? And if you have paperwork in place, I just encourage you to make sure, take this and make sure that the pieces that you need to have done are done correctly. Review your stuff. You should review it regularly. You shouldn't just be doing it, and then putting it in a folder. Actually, I've already told my mother that when I come visit her later on this year, we're going to go over her stuff and make sure everything's still what she wanted. She just automatically said yes. I said, okay, but we're still going to review it to make sure every single piece in there is what you want. So you should do that regularly as well.
And especially if, in my case, my partner is from Missouri. He had his will done. When we moved here, he thought, oh, well, my will is all done. Well, his will in Missouri was not going to, the information there was not going to carry over and be legitimate in Florida. A lot of people need to know that. You might think you have, your will done in another state, you move down here, and they're not going to mesh with each other. So that, that's another thing people have to make sure that they do.
So this other piece, the last piece of this piece that I want to show you on those wish one is at the bottom on the right, it talks about if you change your mind. So you can say, for example, you have a DNR and now you think, you know what, I don't want that. I want to be resuscitated. You just make sure that this goes away, or that you sit down with somebody if you have your paperwork already drawn up and adjust. If your current paperwork says that you do want to be resuscitated, should your heart stop, and you change your mind and you're ready to to do that DNR and get that done, that do not resuscitate, then you want to make sure that all of your paperwork matches with your changes of how things go. You know, even with hospice, you can get on hospice because you meet the criteria, and things might start to go better for you again. You don't have to stay on hospice. You can say, you know what, I'm doing really well. I don't think I need hospice right now. And again, that's a decision that you can make, and you can come off of hospice. You can come off and go on. It's not a requirement that if you put in here that when the time is right, I want to be on hospice, that decision-making doesn't mean that once you say you're on hospice, that's a one-way direction. You can actually change your mind and stop doing that. But that's where, again, your decision-making process, when you become unable to make your own decisions, that you need to make sure that you've got it documented exactly what you want. So on wish 2, we'll go flip over there for a little bit. And so it talks about who your caregiver is, and that can be virtually anyone that's helping to care for you as you deal with a serious illness, and what your expectations are. And then this piece right here in the middle, it says, what life support means to me. And so I'm going to read this one to you just because it's important, and it takes us into some conversation we've already had, but it may also spark some other thoughts and questions for you, which is, life support treatment means any medical procedure, device, or medication to keep me alive. Life support treatment includes medical devices put in me to help me breathe, food and water supplied by medical device, like a tube feed, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, which we've talked a little bit about, major surgeries, blood transfusion, dialysis, antibiotics, and anything else that's meant to keep me alive. If I wish to limit the meaning of life support treatment because of my religious or personal beliefs, I write this limitation in the space below to make very clear what I want and under what conditions. And so that's the piece where you're starting to talk about, of all those things, are there pieces you do want? Because you can pick and choose. It's kind of an a la carte menu when it comes to end of life and what treatments you want to have. Do you want to have CPR, but you don't want to have artificial nutrition? Because that truly is one of those pieces that when you think about it, that you can't, that means you're not eating on your own. You're not nourishing yourself, and they're using something to sustain you. You know, and there's varying time periods from food or water and how long you can survive without one or the other. And so when you look at that, and again, this is where I get to use my grandfather, because he was actually very much of sound mind when he decided not to get his surgery for his bowel obstruction. And he knew that he didn't want that artificial nutrition. He didn't want the artificial hydration. He wanted to let nature take its course. And so he was able to verbalize that at the time he was in the ER, and everybody knew that's what he wanted. But if something happens where you don't have the ability to state that, that's why you have to have it in writing somewhere. If it's in your original documents that you have from wherever you did them when you first did them, to something like this. But you need to make sure that documentation exists somewhere so that everyone knows this is my expectation. And again, if you've assigned the wrong person, you could potentially have a little bit of a hiccup with that. So if you're looking on to the right-hand side, I'm not going to cover the do not resuscitate, because I think we did, and if you guys have questions on that, we obviously could do that. But close to death, you know, again, when you get close to death, I want to have life support treatment, or I don't want to have it, or I want to have it if my doctor believes it can help. So again, you have the ability to identify which way you're really looking at that. If you're, again, my grandfather, 92, he said, I don't want it. You know, he could have been at 92 and said, I do want it. I do want the surgery, and I do want all that stuff. But if you're not able to make those decisions, the benefit is somebody else needs to be able to make your wishes known. And that's why when you look at the piece that says in a coma and not expected to wake up or recover, you know, maybe you still have, you don't have a DNR. You expect full resuscitation. But when you come out of the resuscitation, you don't have any kind of opportunity to communicate. that's where you want to make sure that this piece is in place for you. I don't want to have any life support if I'm in a coma. I want to have to breathe naturally. I don't want to be on a ventilator. And I can tell you there are many times that we get called into the hospital and we are at the hospital with a prospective patient who is on a ventilator who may or may not survive being taken off the ventilator. And so we're there to be able to pick them up onto hospice the second the ventilator's turned off and they're extubated, which means they took the tube out. And so we're there for that purpose. That person, originally, before they were in that hospital bed, may not have wanted that. They may not have even wanted to be in a ventilator situation, but they didn't have the paperwork, their family didn't know what their wishes were, and that's where you have that problem come into play, is who knows what who wants. And so, again, identifying that kind of thing here allows you to do that. And again, it gives you those same three choices. I want it, I don't want it, I want it if a doctor believes it will help me. Now, one of the things that I like to talk about when it comes to doctors is, how many of you think doctors are educated on end of life with a significant amount of education? They're not. Their whole job is to keep every single person alive. That was what they were trained to do. It's not a knock against them. That's what they were trained to do, is to figure out how to help you continue to live. So if they don't know what your decision-making process is, they're going to continue to do their job. So when you check that third one, it depends on what your real expectation is, and that's where you want to make sure those are known. You know, if the expectation is that it will keep you alive, but it's not really going to help you have quality, that's where you have to identify what your desire is and what your need is. Same thing with hospice. You don't get on hospice until you get to that point. Were you going to say something?
So it was kind of a question, because I'm curious about it as well. So the third choice there, where it says, I want to have life support treatment if my doctor believes it could help, but I want it to stop if it's not helping my condition or symptoms. Can you set a time limit on that? Can you say, I'm okay to be on it for 3 months, and if it hasn't helped my condition, I want to come off of it?
So anybody have a gut feeling of what they think the answer to that question might be?
Yes.
You can. You're setting your parameters. On this paperwork, or any paperwork you have, you know, I want the doctor to do this without allowing this to go any further than 90 days, with no evidence of being beneficial.
All right, if you wrote that in, would you have to sign it to make sure that was?
That's what I'm questioning. Like, if you wrote it down there, if you date it, write it, and
Sign it.
So,
sign or initial.
I'm just gonna skip back to show you all of your signature stuff on this stapled document is back here that shows that these were your wishes, and it's all one piece.
Sign that violation.
So anything that's in here is that expectation. So again, I take it back. The other thing that you have to be really cautious about is if you already have documents that indicate what your wishes are, you want to make sure those, that's why I encourage everybody to review, to continue to review your documents, because you get to decide how you go. And again, there's not a person sitting in this room that gets out of here and continues to breathe longer than, well, you can live longer than anybody else, but ultimately there will be a last breath for everybody sitting there. And it's your choice on how you want that to go for you. And that's the part that that's why this is such an important thing to do, whether it's you've already got the documents, but you should review them every couple of years as you get older. I will tell you right now that my wife and I have talked about doing this, and we have been horrible about not doing it. I'm one of those people that if something happened, my wife would knee-jerk and she would do everything she could. That's why I know I have to do this. Now, she probably doesn't feel it as urgent because she knows what I do for a living, so she knows I'm going to be more of the mindset of, like my mom thinks I'm going to be. So yes, anything that you check in here, you can put any stipulations you want. You can say, because this says, if my doctor believes it could help. People can infer that. Is it a specialist? Is it your primary care doctor that thinks it's going to help? So you can be more specific. The purpose of 5 wishes is to make sure you have a generic, relatively all-encompassing foundation for people to work from. That person who you signed on as your healthcare surrogate at the very beginning on that first page is the person who's going to be using this as their guide when you have something like that happen. And so the important part is to make sure you've covered this as best you can. And that's why if you've done this with an attorney, they ask you 1,000 questions, because they want to make sure that they've covered every possible thing that could have happened. But if you don't have anything at all, this piece makes it so you at least have something that somebody has, that somebody can refer to and say, he only wants this or she only wants this if a specialist in that field says it would be beneficial. Or if my personal physician, doctor, whomever, says, then I want to do it. Because then what happens if you change doctors?
Oh, he does.
Or he dies, or he moves
Or
to
retires.
Oklahoma. My cardiologist was the greatest guy in the world, and then he moved to Oklahoma to run his own practice. I'm like, dude, you just kind of left me high and dry here. But I wasn't the only one. But if I'd have had him being the be-all and end-all for my cardiology, I have to make sure I fix my paperwork to whoever it became next. And so that's important for us to make sure we're documenting. And so there are 3 specific instances that they ask you, I want, I don't want, or whatever the doctors think is best. And that's that if they think I'm close to death, if I'm in a coma and not expected to wake up or recover, and then that third one up in the top right is permanent and severe brain damage and not expected to recover. So thinking of strokes. You have a stroke and there's significant damage and there's not an expectation that it's going to be beneficial for you to have life support, that you're not going to fully recover. And again, you can check, I want yes, and then down at the bottom, you can say, but, and you can put what your but is. If 3 doctors feel I'm not getting better, and then that's up to your healthcare surrogate to then turn around to the one doctor that's saying, let's keep them on life support and say, I need you to find 2 other doctors based on my loved one's paperwork or my friend's paperwork to identify who we agree. And that's actually probably not going to be a question you want to ask that doctor because he's going to go get the 2 that agree with him. But if you have the people at the hospital go and find 2 more doctors, a hospitalist, your primary care physician, and a specialist. And those 3 doctors can identify. So the biggest piece of all of this paperwork is, this is your choice. These are your choices to make, and it's important to make sure that they match what you want. Because if 2 of these documents show up, which can happen, and has happened, the one with the most recent date and signature is the one people are going to follow. Now, I will tell you, if you have something from a lawyer and you do this, you're going to struggle with people arguing about how this wasn't really intended to replace the other one. It was a guide. But if you have nothing and this is all you have, they're going to be able to follow. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Any questions on the what I want kind of pages here? All right. So wish 3. My wish for how comfortable I want to be. And so this takes you into that, what if you want this, what if you don't want that, what if you want to, this takes into a crossing out thing. This is one of those things that, having written work contracts before in a previous life, I would probably be initialing these things that I cross out, because I want to make sure that people knew that it was me crossing it out, not somebody else, but that's just me. The document's still expected to have been done in your hand and been witnessed by somebody else to say, yep, you did all that at the time that it was done. Having copies of this is smart to have, just because you want to make sure if you did do something like this, that it's there. But you have things like, I don't want to be in pain. I want my doctor to give me enough medicine. Now, in our business, hospice, everybody thinks we're going to give them morphine and kill them. Morphine is used for a variety of reasons, and the amount that it would take to kill you, we never come anywhere near that the morphine that we use oftentimes is to help your lungs relax so you can breathe easier. It's not even about the pain side of it. So you have to take into account, what do you want, you know? If I can't control my bowel or bladder, if, you know, I want my lips moist. I remember doing that with my grandfather the day before he died. The little sponge sucker that they have on a stick that they get water in and keep their lips moist because they're no longer drinking, they're no longer able to take fluids down. You know, all those little things are pieces that you can identify. And again, what if there's something you don't see in here? What do? You write it in somewhere and make sure that it's known. So you have all of those little pieces that are just about comfort. And then, you know, wish 4 is, how do I want people to treat me? Do you want people to just leave you alone? Do you want just one person sitting with you? Do you want your family to come? Do you want them to let friends come visit you and sit with you? You know, in our business as a hospice, we have volunteers who will come and sit with loved ones when their family can't be there so that they aren't stressed and strained and things of that nature. Heather just sent in a request for one recently to do some stuff for us. So, you know, all of those things. If you're on hospice, do you want to have a chaplain come and pray with you? Do you want to just have your own chaplain coming and praying with you? Do you want, you know, all of those things are things that these are to keep you thinking about what you might need or want. That may not happen. Now, the other thing you may have is you may have things in here that are more specific. When you look through these little checklists, you know, I wish to have pictures of my loved ones near my bed. That may not be something that you have in your paperwork that you had done by an attorney. Maybe you want to go add that stuff. Maybe you want to make sure that there's an addendum added to it of all these kinds of things. You can always do that. I mean, if you've ever had to deal with any kind of contract, and most of us have signed one for a property or a car or something like that, you know, we can always do an addendum to something too. So that's always an opportunity, is to take these pieces and make sure they're in there. If there's something in there that's not, because some of these seem like they're so obvious, but they're really not sometimes. Because sometimes we get tunnel vision. You know, I'm the healthcare surrogate for my mom. I could get really tunnel vision and not be thinking about things like she'd probably like to have a picture of her dad sitting next to her. Those are things that if you share them, you're going to get your final wishes. And I tell everybody that's why you want to be on hospice earlier than later, because we identify everything that your wishes are. These things happen. We get copies of this stuff when somebody gets onto hospice. We get copies of this when you go on to palliative care. So the difference between hospice is 6 months or less for a disease to take its normal course. Palliative can be beyond that 6 months or years. Doesn't mean that you're going to die in 6 months, which is why everybody waits till the last 3 days. But the important part is it's quality over quantity. And that's what this is too. This is also about. When you're in one of these situations, you're looking more at the quality of what's left in your life as opposed to trying to get 2 more days. And my second soapbox patient is my father, stage 4 cancer with Mets, which he had gotten to different parts of his body. And he, kicking and screaming, would not go on hospice. And part of it was because he was 72. The other part of it is I was the only one of the 7 people that were close to him who said, is it really worth that fight? Because the rest of them, it was that emotional attachment that we can't let you go yet. You have to fight. You have to do everything you can to try to stay here. But because of the business I'm in, I knew that wasn't going to happen. And as a result, my dad died 2 hours prior to his hospice appointment. And I have a brother who still struggles. 5 years next month will be how long my dad's been gone. I have a brother who still struggles. Had he had hospice involved, he'd have had a bereavement counselor who would have been involved and helped him with that first year and so forth and so on. So again, that's why these questions are important. All that extraordinary life-saving measures, I think my dad might have been here a little longer. I think my brother would have gotten a little bit more help than he needed. So it's important to know what your decisions are and how they're going to affect everything. Because had I been in charge of my dad's stuff, when he had the stroke that he had, maybe that changes some of that conversation. So how you want to be treated. And then my wish for what I want my loved ones to know. And so this is the piece that again, your healthcare surrogate can help convey some of your wishes, because you want to make sure that if you suddenly are in a position where you can't speak for yourself, these are things that your healthcare surrogate, your person that you're entrusting to do all this stuff, can say, he wanted me to let you know. He wanted you guys to know. She wanted you to know. And that's what this piece is a little bit about. So, you know, forgiveness, you know, people you love, things like that. And then as you continue further on to the right, you see that there's an after my death, I would like my body to be buried or cremated. So you can identify that. Where you want your remains to go. Again, I sat with both of my brothers with my dad when he told me, us as a group, that he wanted to be at Gettysburg and he wanted to be at Quantico. My dad was a career Marine, and those were the two places that were most important to him. But I had a brother who really wanted me to go to Arlington. So upon my dad's passing and them getting the urn back from the crematorium, his significant other called me and said, come pick this up because you're the one that'll make sure what your dad wants. And so I went and got it. And I literally held my dad's ashes hostage for about 3 months until my dad's best friend was the one that finally convinced my brother that what he wanted was not true. Because fun fact about Arlington, because I would have been fine with it, but Arlington says they must have 100% of the ashes for you to be buried at Arlington. My dad, before he died, said he wanted to be in 2 places, Gettysburg and Quantico.
How would they know?
They wouldn't, and that's what my brother said. But you know what I knew? My dad wouldn't lie to the government he worked for that many years. And my brother and I went round and round. I'm really surprised he didn't try to drive 10 hours to my house to come steal it. But at the end of the day, my dad's best friend is the one that I finally emailed and said, look, I can't take Andy anymore. Dad wants to be in these 2 places. Andy wants him to go to Arlington. This is what Arlington says. I said, if you disagree with me that my dad would lie to the government and take a scoop for here and a scoop for there and the rest of it can go to Arlington, I'll agree with Andy. He goes, absolutely not. Your dad would definitely never do that. So I forwarded the email to Andy and I said, Dad's going to Gettysburg. If you want to come, great. If you don't, and we did. We had a good time. He understood. And at the end, I was able to also take some of those ashes and give it to all 7 of those people and say, I think Dad would have wanted you to have some of this to take wherever you wanted to be able to be with Dad. So everybody got a little bit to take where they want. All of those are things that you want to put in paper to make sure that what you want is what's going to happen with your ashes when you're gone. You know, maybe it's, I want to make sure somebody checks in on Chris, my other brother, who struggled with this. Maybe he needed to put that on paper for somebody. So then there's some pieces that are about you. You know, if anyone asks how I want to be remembered, this is what I want. If there's a memorial service for me, I want this to happen. I want this played. I want these songs played. My wife has identified 4 times. I told her just to put them right because my memory's horrible and I don't remember what song she likes. But I know there's 2 that I think my kids probably know better than me, but I'm not going to remember. You know, what do you want when you're immediately when you pass? Do you want your family to still be around you? Do you want your family to go away? Because typically you're going to have a body cleaned up when somebody passes. Do you want your family there for that? You can make those comments. I want to be able to be alone and I don't want you to see me again after I stop breathing until. You can do all of that. And a lot of this, and that's the hardest part for most people, is this is real talk. This is the stuff this is final for people. And it's hard for people to think about that. But again, I go back to, we all took a first breath, we're all going to take a last one. How do you want your last ones to go? And what do you want to have happen after? And then the next page, on page 10, is really the signature stuff and talks about what you're doing. You have to make sure you have 2 witnesses. And then if you notice at the bottom, notarization is only required in Missouri, South Carolina, North Carolina, and West Virginia. So you don't have to have it notarized in the state of Florida. But you do have to have the witnesses. The witnesses are people who watched you sign it. I would sit, if I were going through witnesses, and show them everything that was on what pages and stuff, just to make sure that they saw that I had completed every page, or I had written what I had written on every page, because those are the people that technically could be called on to come back and answer questions about it. So, the people who can't sign, it says, I also declare that I am over 18 years of age, and it says 19 in Alabama. Again, that doesn't affect us here. And I am not the individual appointed as a proxy, so the person who's your healthcare surrogate cannot be one of your witnesses. The person's healthcare provider, including an owner-operator of a health, long-term care, or residential community, an employee of the person's healthcare provider. So again, you're going to want somebody that's not related to the situation, is the easiest way to put that. You want to make sure whoever's witnessing your information can't be challenged by that one member of your family who's going to have a problem with the entire document and wants it thrown away. An employee of a life insurance company that you work with, anybody that's related by blood, marriage, or adoption, a beneficiary of any legal instrument, account, benefit plan of the person, which means if they are on your life insurance policy, they shouldn't be signing this as a witness. Again, it's going to be somebody that really has nothing to do with the environment of what's going on. And to the best of their knowledge, you don't owe them money. All right, so on this last page, what to do after you complete the 5 wishes. Make sure you sign and witness the form just the way it is, it says in the instructions. Then your 5 wishes will be legal and valid. Talk about them with your healthcare agent, your family members, others who care about you, and give them copies. Keep the original copy you signed in a special place in your home. Do not put it in a safe deposit box. Why not?
Can't get it open.
Can't get to it if it was something that they can't get to. But you want to make sure people know where to find it. It's just like the DNR. Who knows where that yellow copy of your do not resuscitate order is supposed to be? On the refrigerator. My neighbor downstairs showed me hers, and it was on white paper. So I took 3 sheets of yellow paper from my office and took them home and made her 3 copies. I made her 3 copies because she was very difficult to get to put it on a refrigerator, because her opinion, which I understood, was, if they find me dead in my bed, I don't want them to do that. Okay, but they know they're supposed to look at their, but she didn't understand that. So we had 3 copies. We had one that was on her bedroom door, one that was on the refrigerator, and one that was on where I found it in the first place, so she'd not go say, oh, it's not there, and go put a copy in the wrong spot off the refrigerator.
Good thinking.
So we made sure that all of that stuff was where people could find it. So down at the bottom, you'll see it says 5 wishes card. And so this card is kind of, it reminds me of my driver's license in Virginia. If you were from Virginia, your driver's license had 2 pieces folded and your picture taken. It was actually done on a dot matrix printer back in the day. So it talks a little bit about the different states. Again, you'll notice that when you look at this, it says Michigan, it says Wisconsin, it says California, Connecticut, Delaware, Nevada, New York, South Carolina, and Vermont. So again, none of those pieces apply to you guys because we're in Florida. So the other thing is, I do think that your doctor should get a copy of this. There's a group that does a thing, it's a letter writing campaign that they do, and I forget the actual technical name of it, but they do something similar to 5 Wishes. They do a project where they sit, that's what it's called, a letter writing project. They do a project where they sit with a group like this, and everybody writes a letter to their doctor with all this kind of information in it. And then you get that letter to your doctor. That becomes part of your medical record. Your medical record is considered a legal document and supposed to be available for them. Do I think your doctor wants to have a copy of your full last will and testament and all that stuff? No. But this is all healthcare related. And that's the piece that's important for the doctor's perspective is if you have an event in your life and you end up at the hospital and somebody connects with your doctor to say, hey, Mrs. Johnson's in the hospital, he's going to go, I have paperwork in my records for her, or his nurse will. And they'll remember to look at this. So it's important to make sure people know what your requests are. Any questions? Check your stuff. If you fill one of these out, it really should only be because you don't have enough of this information in something else. Because you also don't want this to turn into something that somebody can say, and if you've ever read a contract, at the end they say, the nullification of one paragraph does not nullify the entire document, because there are people who will try to argue that way. And so if this nullifies a portion of your document, you want to make sure it doesn't nullify your whole document that you had before, because things end up in probate court and that's no fun. So again, this is a great reference tool if you've already got your paperwork to make sure everything that you need is in your paperwork. If you don't have paperwork, this is a great starting point to do that kind of thing and put in place. I won't keep talking.
Thank you. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone for coming.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How is hospice financed?
You want me to let you talk now?
Sure, that would be great. So the majority of hospice is paid for under Medicare.
Okay.
So if you've got your traditional Medicare, your services would be covered under that. Avow as a nonprofit, we also do accept other insurances, supplemental insurances and insurance for people who are not age appropriate for Medicare, if you will. But because we are nonprofit, we also have a foundation that raises money, so we also help people that are underinsured and uninsured.
So how many of you have a Medicare Advantage plan? Anybody? Or just the traditional Medicare? If you have the red, white, and blue metal, I think they're metal now, those cards, that's the traditional Medicare. Medicare Advantage is becoming a big piece of our insurance products that are out there. Essentially what Medicare did is they contracted for insurance companies to provide it at a cheaper rate, but they actually bill Medicare more than Medicare actually spends. So it's just a way of getting the government's dollars to go in a different direction. But if you had one of those plans, we actually revert that back to traditional Medicare. So when Heather talked about most of it being covered, everything that's related to your hospice diagnosis is covered at 100% when you're on hospice. If you're on palliative, it's treated just like any other specialist. So if you went to a specialist where you had a $50 copay, you're going to have a $50 copay on the palliative side. And so those kinds of pieces come into play there. But if you ever end up with a position where you redo your Medicare and you decide you're going to try look at one of those Medicare Advantage plans or something, just know that that's because what happens with those is you get on them, they're supposedly great, and then when you need hospice, you come off, or you have some other reason you need to use a Medicare benefit versus their benefit. Once you do that, you're typically not going to be able to get back to your Medicare Advantage, which, in all honesty, and I'm not an insurance person, so I'm not telling anybody what your choices should be, but Medicare is in place for a reason, and that's where I leave that conversation at. But doctor, nurse, medications, home health aides if necessary, any equipment you need, all covered at 100% on the Medicare hospice benefit. And it's really, I would say 99% of what you need in a medication perspective is going to still be covered by us, because we have to go argue with Medicare about why we didn't cover something. And there's usually only one reason that we wouldn't cover something, that we can't even loosely tie the diagnosis that you're being treated for. So say you have hypertension, but you have COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So it's really more of a lung issue that you're coming on hospice for, but you've also got hypertension. We're typically going to still pay for the hypertension drugs because we can't prove that one isn't tied enough to the other. So the only drugs that we really don't pay for are the ones that are used for treating something in an aggressive manner or trying to cure. So when you have a $5,000 wonder drug every month, we're not gonna pick that one up because it was really probably more curative in nature. But if you have something that you're taking for high blood pressure, you're taking a statin drug, all of those things are typically not gonna come off of your medication schedule. So,
Thanks. We-
Thank you
we-
so much.
Thank you. We don't want to interrupt.
you're okay. Any other questions? Happy to,
No, it's good.
all right?
Well, I did have one about organ donation.
Sure.
At our age, is that relative? Does anyone want an 85 and 89-year-old person's organ?
So here's what I would say about that. I would let somebody else decide if you're willing to let them have it.
Well, it's in here. It's mentioned in here somewhere.
Towards the back.
Here.
Right, but it's
No, it's under wish one. Donate usable organs or tissues of mine as allowed by law. It's right
Yeah.
on page 5.
So some people would say, I don't want another person to have them, but I want the University of Florida to have them for research. You could have that piece come into play. But you may have somebody, they may think, other than the fact that you had a stroke and they had you on life support, because that's where the tricky part comes in then too, because they have to have you on life support to get to a point that they can take your organs. They can't have you be passed away for a certain period of time. So that's something that you would want to consider. Do you want to donate your body to science? Do you want to, all of those things would be something that could come into play. Again, if a 70-year-old person could benefit from an organ that really they would see as being a viable option, if you're willing to give an organ, why not? But that's, again, personal choice and should be documented.
Okay, thanks. But it's in here.
As an option.
That's the
Donate
one thing
usable
about,
organs.
that's why I tell everybody,
You
if
can
you,
cross it out, but why cross it out?
it's up to you. Do you want your body to be intact when it's buried? So, again, it depends on what your goals and preferences are for what you're trying to do. And that's why I tell everybody, this is way more detailed more often than not. You have little things like that that may not be in your actual documentation that you already have in existence. So, sitting down with somebody, again, is the stuff that's in here worth another conversation? Might be, but again, nobody does anything for free anymore. So that's the piece that you have to balance on that. But again, if you've got paperwork that you want to make sure is very sound, review your paperwork, look through these things, tab, highlight, circle, whatever you think is important, and then take a look at your paperwork and decide, is enough information in there to do this? And maybe it's not that necessary. Maybe you even take this and say, I filled this out for your information, and you tell the person who's your healthcare surrogate, this is not in my will and testament. But these are some things that I think you should know. They're not life-altering, they're not earth-shattering. They're just pieces that you want that person who's your healthcare surrogate to know. That might be beneficial to you from this perspective too. You don't have to make it your certain legal document. You don't have to get it witnessed to be that certain legal document. You don't sign it. You can just circle those things and say, fill this out for you, I want you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.